Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 147. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed, award-winning performance artist, puppeteer, and pop culture icon, Paul Zaloom. Paul.
Hi.
How you doing?
That's an impressive introduction. I hope to live up to
it. So it's interesting, I reached out to you. You have Vermont roots. You went to Goddard School. You're also an alumni of Bread and Puppet Theater, and
Farm and Wilderness camps in Plymouth Union and that area of it's not Central Vermont.
No, it's like we're in the Northeast Canada, the Quaker camp, right?
Yes, northern southern Vermont. Like the main camps are just south of Woodstock,
right?
But I went to Salt Ash Mountain, which is on Lake Nineveh, which I believe is in Plymouth Union.
Right.
And yeah, great Quaker camp. They were integrated from day one in 1947 when they were founded.
Right.
And a really wonderful place. And I was an exchange student at Putney School in Putney, Vermont as a high school senior. So yeah, I go back a little bit, and then Goddard College, the great hippie college in Plainfield, Vermont, which is now a low residency institution and doing real well.
Yeah, they were able to pivot pretty well to everything as even pre-COVID when school was different. People were expecting to work more remotely. People were expected to learn more remotely as well, and having those hybrid classes. And it was a couple deep breaths for a second there, but I was really happy to see that Goddard was able to kind of pivot and be able to pull off something that is being able to still stay relevant and successful in their academics. So
yeah, I mean, the problem with being in an experimental school is if your experiments succeed, then other schools that have better endowments and have more resources steal the ideas. And so you have to keep reinventing yourself.
Right.
That's always been the dilemma for experimental progressive schools, whether they be Putney School or Antioch, Goddard, Hampshire to some degree, New College in Florida.
Yeah.
Some of which are around, some of which no longer are.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's where you initially kind of got into it when you're at Goddard. They had the Bread and Puppet Theater, which is also a Vermont institution, kind of started off. That's when you kind of first got your, kind of started sinking your teeth into puppetry from there, correct?
Yeah, Bread and Puppet was in residence at Goddard on a farm that was part of the campus just down the road from Northwood, Kate Farm, which is now it's back to being a working farm. Yeah. And so the theater was in residence there, later moved to Glover in the Northeast Kingdom to another farm, even more spectacular. And so I took a couple of workshops and ended up joining the company and writing my senior thesis about Bread and Puppet. And I'm on the board, and it's been 50, I don't know, 5 years or something like
that. Well, you've been on the board for 55 years?
No, working with the company.
Yeah,
associated with a company, working with a company.
Okay.
I'm on the advisory board because I live far away, and it's better for me to advise. And but it's pretty much the same as a voting board member.
Right. Because I was going to say you're way too young to be on a board for 55 years.
Yeah. We didn't. I mean, I guess we had a board then, but we didn't really. We're much more oriented as a conventional organization now with a board because the demands on us and the times have changed.
Right.
I mean, we've always been a nonprofit. We've always had a board, but we're much more focused on the future, and just because the times kind of demand it.
Right. And so it's interesting as you bring that up because it's just the idea of the arts and the idea of, and you mentioned in a previous interview was funny because I was, doing the research on it before we were talking. You did an interview back in 2016 that you talked about. You talked about that that puppetry is coming back. Like you were, this is as you talked about. This is pre TikTok, these little 1 minute video things. But do you still stand on that? Being 6 years later, do you still see that there is something about the analog version of art being able to interact with that on a physical level? Do you still see this push that puppetry is still stronger than it was, say, like 20 years ago?
I think that's probably true. There's a couple of universities that have puppetry programs, particularly University of Connecticut, which also has a fabulous puppet museum, the Ballard Museum, run by the great puppet scholar John Bell, who has been a colleague of mine in Bread and Puppet for 1,000,000 years.
Oh, wow.
An amazing performer. And CalArts had a puppet program for a while. And people teaching classes and stuff like that. There's the Eugene O'Neill Center that does a puppet thing every year for a week or two. So there's a lot more like educational / institutional training and all that kind of stuff. And they just, grind people out, pop people out. You got these puppeteers all over the place. So that probably has something to do with it. And just, it's cheap and down and dirty and, alternative. Puppeteers have traditionally gotten away with saying things that actors can't say because the authorities by nature, sort of lean on the stupid side and don't really make the connection between the puppeteer and the puppet. It's sort of mediated. The political opinions are mediated. And are not like firsthand. Right. So that's been true for thousands of years, that puppeteers have been able to get away with more than actors in terms of saying things. And puppetry has always been political because of that. And also because puppeteers, played on the street or, they hung out with the pickpockets and the prostitutes or whatever. So we've always been disreputable. And I hope that reputation stays. I don't hang out with a lot of prostitutes or pickpockets, but I'm fascinated by pickpockets.
But it's interesting that you talked about that that when you were on when you talked about when you were on Beakman's World, that you did mention that one of the directors did say that what was cool is that you had your movements had a beginning, middle, and end, and that was part of the fact that you were able to some of that training of puppetry. Where do you what were some of the other points of that if someone's interested in because we have a lot of artists and writers that listen to the program, what would be some of the other trainings that you would have to pick up on if you're getting a career in puppetry?
I'm not convinced that you need training. Right. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. I mean, I've taught puppetry. I don't know how valuable that was. Some people told me it was, kind of valuable or whatever. I mean, I wasn't trained. I just learned by experience working with the Bread and Puppet, and we don't have work. I mean, Bread and Puppet does do workshops on the road,
right? Because
all artists have to do that. You can't make a living unless you do it. And there's a good aspect to that. I mean, with Bread and Puppet, the workshops have tended to be just getting people to be in shows. Mm-hmm. So you learn by doing. Peter he doesn't teach. He lectures, but he doesn't lecture about puppetry in a way where you can walk away and say, oh, now I understand puppetry. That's not really his tip. He's more ranting about politics and the duties of puppetry and cheap art and the possibilities and things of that nature.
Right.
I mean, I think you can get something really great out of going to puppet school. My friends who went to UConn, they learned to sew. They learned how to use a sewing machine. Now that's like super helpful.
Right.
So I never learned. I mean, I do sew. You have to sew if you're a puppeteer. You got to fix stuff on the road, you know. And they learn voice also, voice stuff, which I think is really important and really good. And sometimes they're exposed to a very broad swath of influences, which can be really good. I taught at the Institut International de la Marionnette, which is in Charleville-Mézières in France, and that's the big international puppet school in France. And that was interesting working with them. And basically, we just made up shows. They, you know, we worked together with found objects and did some stuff, and then they made work, and then we did a public performance. That's the way I like to teach.
Right.
Have people come with material, I help them work it out, and at the end of the whole thing, we have a cabaret, and everyone performs.
Okay, because if you think, you know, like if you think about it, like what's so important about puppetry is basically taking all the arts and putting it together. As you say, there's crafting, there's painting, there's acting, there's writing, you take every single piece of every type of art and you put it into one genre and say you have to learn all of it. You know?
Right. You don't have to be good at any of it. I mean, it helps to be, you know, it helps to be good.
Right.
I mean, the thing is, I had a friend of mine recently. He's an artist, and he was talking about painting, and I just thought, wow, he's kind of a snob, and he's bad mouthing all these painters who I like. And then I thought, well, you know, I'm as opinionated about puppetry as he is about art. So, and you know, when you do something for a while, you do begin to have opinions about what the rules are, what you can do, what you can't do, and
right.
And then you see an amateur like pick up a puppet and do something that maybe breaks the rules or that you can't do, that
Right.
you, for some reason, that person is able to. So that's what keeps you humble. That's what makes you realize that all the training and all your dedication, all that can still be trumped by some person just picking up a puppet and doing something that you can't do. And that's wonderful. I love that. That's really great. You know, the whole thing about being an expert. Yeah, there's an aspect of it, but it ultimately, of thinking of yourself as being an expert is not helpful. It's better to think of yourself as being a novice or somehow stripping away all that experience. And
Right.
we also say in puppetry that the puppet tells you what to do. You don't get to tell it what to do. And it's such a corny cliche.
Right.
But if you talk to anybody who works with puppets, they'll tell you that's the case.
Right.
You know, you get the thing, you play with it like a kid plays. You play, and then you see what it does. I mean, I do ventriloquism. That's one of the types of puppetry I do. And there have been times when the dummy, whose name is Butch Manley, he just writes his own material. It makes me laugh. I don't know where he comes up with this stuff. You know, a lot of people tell you that, writers and stuff like that, they have like voices in their heads. And yeah, there's me with the dummy. He's an old school, kind of a Frank Marshall style figure.
Right.
And it's been a challenge figuring that out. I have to say, it's figuring out what the right material. It's very different than puppetry. It's a kind of puppetry, but it's really different than all the rest. And what you see in the other part of the image there, that's a show called White Like Me, where I use action figures and tchotchkes and knickknacks and bubble wrap and give a dog a bone, blah, 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 to tell a story about white anxiety. And I made that show in 2010. It was a little prophetic. just about white anxiety about being marginalized. So a phony history of Caucasian wonderfulness.
Right. Do you see some of the? What would you say too was that the the medium of puppetry is really good at embracing that other genres have more difficulty in doing?
Well, the thing is, you can play with scale.
Right.
You can pretty much do anything. If you want to go to Mars, you can go to Mars. Like I worked on a film with the painter Sandow Burke and his artistic partner and wife Elise Pignolet and Sean Meredith, the director, and he had done a whole version of Dante's Inferno,
Right.
and set sort of in contemporary times. And he said, "Oh, let's make a movie." And I was like, "I don't want to do a live action movie of Dante's Inferno. Like, who wants to do that? Build all these sets, and it's going to cost a mint, and it's a pain in the ass."
Right.
I'm not interested. I said, "Let's do toy theater. Let's do paper theater." And they were like, "What?" And we went to the Toy Theater Museum that used to be in Santa Ana, and I conned them into it. And they totally got into it, and it's just really fun to use puppets. You can just anything you can imagine, you can pretty much do. That's what I like about it. And no special effects, or maybe sometimes a cover and error or something, but
Right. What do you see as like one of your go-to, like if because you kind of mentioned like the paper puppets, what's your kind of go-to like puppetry that you're just like, I'm gonna go straight to this one? Would it be like shadow puppets, rod and arm puppets, marionettes? What would be the one that you kind of default to, your default medium?
Well, it really depends, like what the project is,
Right.
what you want to tackle, what subject matter you're interested in, and then you figure out what medium is the one that's going to be the most helpful to accomplishing my evil agenda. I was sitting around one Christmas and looking at some of the Christmas tchotchkes my mother had, the little Santa Clauses from Denmark, and it occurred to me, oh, that's interesting, Santa Claus. Like, you do a close-up of this one, then cut to a two-shot of this one with a snowman, and then do an extreme close-up of the third Santa Claus, and everyone would still know it's the same character. So you could that's only true of Santa Claus and Jesus and Joseph Stalin and a couple other people. And I don't have Joseph Stalin tchotchkes; they're hard to get. And Jesus, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. So, Santa Claus. So 300 Santa Clauses later, and we've made a bunch of films, and it's, I started doing found objects in the late 70s, just because I thought it was interesting to take garbage and debris and packaging material, toys and stuff you found in the trash, and animating that as if it was puppets. And then I want to progress beyond that and using action figures and tchotchkes and knickknacks and just all this ugly crap to use that as puppets. And
Right.
I think the found object thing that caught on. It's become something called object theater and all that. It's become a thing and whatever. But the tchotchke thing, that I call theater of the tchotchke knickknack, that's like, to everyone, that's like cheating. You didn't build them, it's like even worse than the found object thing. But they're so dumb. And what's so great is that somebody made these things with an idea, and they make these expressions, like something like this. It's a Japanese made bisque. It's made in China. A bisque pumpkin, probably for Halloween. I would have guessed this is from the 50s or 40s, but since it's made in China, I'm less certain about it. But anyway, you manipulate it. It's interesting, and the foundness of it and the sort of stupidity of it is fascinating to me.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, we've been making little movies. I have a YouTube channel called Fruit of Zaloom. Fruit of Zaloom. And those videos are on there if you need a 5-minute laugh. That's been my latest undertaking.
Okay. So where do you see, I guess my other question, follow up to that is, we are, knock on wood, we're getting near the end of this pandemic. And have you seen, how important have you seen, as somebody who's been in the arts for a while, have you seen a rise in importance to the arts because of where we've been?
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's always been important to me. I'm a big fan of fine art, of prints and painting, sculpture. I miss going to the museum, doing more of that now. I love reading about it, art and design. So yeah, I don't know where it's placed. I mean, just the simple fact of being in the room with people again is really great.
Right.
You don't really realize it until you're in the middle of it, you're around people, you're at some event, you're like, wow, this is really kind of unfamiliar. It's been a while. So yeah, I hope there's a resurgence and a certain amount more interest because we've all been hiding in our basements.
Right. I mean, it's almost like, to the point is like, it's when everything first hit, it's like you watched movies, you read books, so we all retreated to the arts to keep ourselves connected. And before this, before COVID, whereas art budgets were being cut in schools, this was being cut. Do you see this as somebody who is I would say like a leading face of one genre of art, which is puppetry and performance art? Do you see that push happening, like a resurgence of investing more money into the arts now because of what we've gone through?
I haven't seen an indication of it, but I'm not that tapped into what's going on in the funding world.
Right.
I don't apply for grants anymore or pay attention to any of that these days. I did serve on a panel. That was interesting. That was interesting way to get connected to the local LA art scene. It was for emergency money, COVID money. And I was very inspired by the work being done by these venues all across the city, the dedication of people, of arts administrators who were not always my favorite, having dealt with people. But at the end of the day, there's so many dedicated people who, work for peanuts, work their fingers to the bone, and so dedicated. And, we artists owe them a lot because they're making it possible for us to do our work. So yeah, that was very inspiring and very eye-opening, and it was tough because we had to select just a certain number of people to get this, $5 million or whatever it was.
Right. And we have for those that are interested, so you do have the Fruit of Zaloom. You have your YouTube channel. Yeah. And this is your found object. This is your found objects.
They're more knickknacks and
tchotchkes.
Yeah. You on the right, that little red doll, that's he's an elf. That's a beautiful one from the 1950s.
Oh,
he's
wow.
really great. And I appear as an elf, and I also appear as Santa. You can see in the middle frame there, I'm Santa.
Yeah.
So once in a while, I will also appear in these things. We do blue screen stuff, but no fancy high tech computer generated stuff. Just once in a while, and most of the sound effects I do myself.
Okay. And that's something.
Crickets, I can't do crickets, so
right.
It's just whatever the need is. There's no point to be super doctrinaire about and having rules and all of that. you do and use whatever makes the people laugh, and whatever makes the joke play.
Right. And so, have you been able to? Because I know pre-COVID that you were doing some workshops, like some. Where have you been able? You've been doing some workshops through some video platforms. Since...
I did some work for UConn for their puppetry program. I did a like a visiting professor thing via Zoom, and I used to travel a lot in Mexico and Brazil,
right?
Because I was on a TV show that was very popular in Latin America, and it was really fun to go down there and perform. The fans are fanatical for some reason in Mexico and Brazil and Venezuela, not in Venezuela, in Chile and Argentina and Paraguay. And so that was fun, going on tour and going down there and doing live shows based on the show. It was a kids' science show called Beakman's World.
Right.
And it was basically science education for kids, and it really struck a chord with the Latin sensibilities. So I went down there a lot doing live shows, and that was fun. And that stopped. That's dried up, but I think it might come back.
Well, because I noticed that on your website you did talk about that. When your Beakman's World ran from 92 to 97, was that?
Well, we shot from 92 to 96 or 97, something like that. But they have been in second run syndication and have been on Canal Once in Mexico, and the reruns and stuff like that. I mean, it would be great if it was on Netflix and it was somewhere other than YouTube these days, because it is evergreen, and it was an educational show. It was, pro-social and all of that.
Right.
But I don't think the studio cares much, and
right.
It's kind of sad, because I think the show is pretty good, and I think it was pretty educational. But we did the best we could. Sometimes it wasn't so hot. Sometimes it was great. Just like anything else.
Well, because one of the things is that it was innovative at its time when that was being shot, because it was the character Beakman was created by one of your friends and colleague at the time.
Jock Church. He was the guy he created it was on the funny pages in the comics, and it was for kids, and he created it on a Mac, and it was syndicated in like 300 newspapers. And a guy in Hollywood got the idea, let's turn this into a kid show to solve the requirements of the Children's Television Act for having a certain amount of educational and or informational programming every day for kids if local stations want to get their licenses renewed. So it was really a government mandate that created the educational shows that came out of the 90s. And it was very much inspired by Soupy Sales and Lord Buckley, and less so Mr. Wizard, but to some degree. Right. And it was a hell of a lot of fun. We had a great time.
It's because one of the things that you mentioned in a previous interview is that you don't see that ever coming back because of the cost of production of those shows was too high, and also they're geared towards kids, where I remember you were saying that nowadays they have to gear children's programming towards parents as well.
Well, and towards merchandising.
Right.
I mean, because the way they make their money is with toys and merchandise. So there are kid shows that, I mean, our show, I think, costs between $200,000 and $250,000 an episode. I think kid shows on TV now are more like $65,000 in terms of production costs. So to have a live action show is really tough to do on $65,000 with any kind of production values. And we had pretty high production values. I mean, it was a big ass set on a sound stage at Sunset Gower Studios, one of the earliest studios in Hollywood. And it was a beautiful set. It was huge. There were all these different locations we could shoot in. And that's kind of what made it fun too, is just the beauty of the set and hanging out there. And we had a great crew and wonderful writers. we just had fun all day, all night long. It was just a total blast. A lot of work though.
Right. It was a lot of work. And but yes, like as you mentioned, is like what would it I'm curious as you say, why wouldn't Netflix pick that up or why wouldn't any of those other things? So do you because Jock Church, he passed away in 2016, correct?
I I think that's right. The
Yeah.
date. He had diabetes. He had a heart attack on the set actually one
Wow.
day, but he had very bad diabetes, and he died. He was a great guy. He was a real character. Had a really interesting history, and we got along really well. Um, and he invented this thing, and
Right.
it turned into something that was, I think, beyond his wildest dreams.
Right.
Yeah,
And did you and because I know for a while you actually did had a Beakman on the Brain. Is that what it
that
Beakman?
was one of the stage shows. I because I come from bread and puppet, like the only way we know how to make a living is like take it on the road. So that was one of the things I learned from bread and puppet is like make a show, figure out how to get it in and out of there quickly, low tech.
Right.
Um, and I toured almost all the states with a bunch of different shows. I made one about the brain because I really found that interesting. And I put ventriloquism, I put toy theater in it. I did sort of a slideshow. I had video. I had all kinds of different media, and it playing for kids in a 1,000-seat theater is a hell of a lot of fun. I love getting them all riled up, and
Right.
I had a lot of burping jokes. I had the one vent figure was a skull, a talking skull,
Hmm.
and he burped a lot. The kids loved that, so it was a lot of fun. I love touring and doing those shows for kids. When I play in Mexico and Brazil, there's like one kid in the audience and 5,000 adults. It's a total like nostalgia thing. So instead of pandering to the kids, I'm pandering to the Mexican adults, which means
Right.
half the show I'm ragging on Trump, which is really fun.
Did you but obviously, I mean, you don't I mean, you do the show in English, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I learned French in school. I've performed in French, but I did not learn Spanish, unfortunately. Uh, but the guy who does the voice for the dubbing, he often accompanies me
Okay.
and does the simultaneous translation. And a lot of young folks who are the fans tend to be college students and also people in their mid 30s and older. They tend to have college educations because they were interested in science and they kind of pursued that and they ended up as doctors or I'm astrophysicists and um, science teachers and all kinds of folks. So a lot of them speak English. I just have to kind of go slow.
Right. So let me ask. So I guess from the business perspective of it, so artists who are wanting to make a living out of this. Uh, so my first question to you is that with Beakman, is that kind of like a loaned out intellectual property, or are you with hypothetically speaking, when this was on the show, is this because was this owned by Jock Church, the character Beakman, or was this something that you shared, or how did that work out?
Um, the Sony and Columbia Pictures Television says they own the 91 episodes
Okay.
and the music. So they say everything else is owned by the estate of Jock Church.
Okay.
So I did the live shows for like 30 years and no one complained. So
Oh
the
wow.
way the copyright law works is I'm allowed to do the live shows because no one complained. I did them for a million years. And Jock was super generous and real cool about letting me do that.
Right. And so a question about puppetry, because I know I have a friend that's a professional clown. Um, I got a lot of friends who are clowns, but I don't have one who's a professional clown. So is it similar to puppetry where if somebody like in a clown, well, they have their own design and that's like they have to trademark it. Is that this kind of similar with puppetry? Like if you like, yeah, you have your ventriloquist. I mean, if you have some, is that specifically, as you said earlier, you kind of create some puppets and you kind of wait to see what their personality kind of becomes as you're kind of building it. Is there some sort of intellectual property piece on that where another puppeteer cannot create the same puppet, anything like that?
I don't know. I've never bothered copywriting anything. There's like, who would want to copy? You know, it would be like a big loser move to like cop something from me, man. I don't suggest it. I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, it's interesting with the Hensons that Jim invented a kind of puppet, these mouth puppets, these foam things that has that watermelon wedge kind of mouth. And I don't think that style or that design is copyrighted. And there's a lot of people who do that style and Muppet style of puppets. And I don't think that the Henson company and the kids are all that happy with that. They're like, that was his thing. That's what he did. Why do it? And I kind of agree with that.
Right.
There are also, theaters that have done bread and puppet style stuff where their sculptural and painting style is not that different. My thing when I left bread and puppet was I want to do something as completely diametrically opposed as possible because you can't compete with the guy. He's like the greatest puppeteer of the 20th century. His work is like unbelievable.
Right.
I couldn't possibly, compete with that. So I did the found objects, and I did, I made a gay Punch and Judy show, Punch and Jimmy.
Right.
And headed in a lot of, did shadow puppets and ventriloquism. Schumann, when he saw my ventriloquist act, he said, "Well, you're very good at that, but I hate that thing." He hates it. So that's cool. I don't care. It's like, it's not his thing. He hates it. It's diametrically opposed to what he believes puppetry should be and should do. And I understand that. And I agree with him, but he's not an American. He's, he was raised in Germany, and ventriloquism is a particular thing. And plus it resonates with us because of our memories of it in television, whether it be, Edgar Bergen with Charlie McCarthy or Senior Wences or Paul
Howdy
Winchell.
Doody. Right.
Yeah. Well, Howdy Doody was a marionette.
Oh, he was a marionette. That's right. Yeah.
So it's a different cultural resonance that's going on there. And I'm fascinated by Vent. I find it completely, totally fascinating. And I'm coming around to a new way of thinking about how to do it. Okay. So I've been writing some material and doing some thinking, and so who knows? Maybe that'll emerge shortly as God knows what.
And would you say that ventriloquism is that specifically kind of like an American form of puppetry that we've kind of assimilated into being more an American cultural thing, or?
Well, I think in the heyday, ventriloquism and throwing your voice and all that stuff, dates back to ancient Greece.
Right.
There were a lot of vents working in England in the 19th century with complicated acts, with lots of dummies, lots of mechanics, all kinds of crap.
Right.
So no, I would not really say it's a distinctly American art form.
Right.
The vent acts in Britain, there were a lot of ventriloquists, and a lot of them doing really interesting work. Yeah.
But that's the one that seems to, like, when people think about puppetry, that's the one that people seem to gravitate towards, as you said, from from the vaudevillian acts and being able to have this, this exchange back and forth, with the jokes back and forth, as well as, is that also one of the more accessible forms of puppetry? If somebody wants to start getting into puppetry, what would you, what would you say if somebody who has like a 10-year-old child who says, "Hey, I love puppetry," what would be that first thing you would say? All right, well, try this first. I mean, obviously they can try anything, but what would you be like? What would be the training wheels version of your that you give advice you would give?
Well, my daughter, when she was a kid, I told her one time, I'm taking all your dolls and I'm all your stuffed animals, and they're all going to the workshop. And some of them I'm going to customize. I'm going to sew them, and I'm going to glue weights to their feet, and I'm going to give them knees and stuff like that. And she was kind of pissed off, but she was also kind of fascinated. So I was working on a sort of Bunraku style show called The House of Horror, where I built these dolls that were, I don't know, they were like a couple of feet tall. And I wanted to use her dolls to figure out what the possibility of movement was with these dolls that I manipulated with handles that were behind them. And so I kind of customized some of her stuff to figure out what I could do, what movements I could get out of them and stuff like that. That's not answering your question. I mean, kids play with toys like with a dollhouse. It's really fun to play. I used to play with my granddaughter's dollhouse with her, and I would do the voices and stuff like that. And she's turning 17 years old today.
Oh, wow.
And I used to do this thing where the doll, you know how dollhouses have like no wall? Yeah. And so the doll would go, la, 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 and it would walk towards the edge, and then it would fall and it would die. And she thought it was hilarious. Again. So I do it like 50 times in a row. So it's just child's play.
Right.
People getting into puppetry, I don't have any advice. The thing is about ventriloquism, which has had this big resurgence because America has talent or something.
Right.
Terry Fader and the young woman whose name I don't know, and also the English woman with the monkey, and also what's his name, Jeff Dunham.
Right.
Terry Fader got a $100 million deal in Vegas to do ventriloquism. So this caused a lot of people to, wow, ventriloquism. But I'm not that interested in any of their acts particularly. I don't find them particularly compelling or interesting. Right. I'm interested in the psychological aspects of it. I mean, and that's kind of why I'm still working on it. David Strassman, who is an American, works a lot in Australia. He travels that area. He explores that area. But I love Senior Wences. I mean, he was really my favorite vent.
Right.
With Johnny, with the little hand that talked and the guy in the box and all of that. He was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We had the wig and everything on the hands. Yeah. Yeah.
And he did the same act for over 70 years.
Right.
And he was on the Sullivan Show all the time. And he lived just down the street from the Ed Sullivan Theater. So if somebody bailed at the last minute and canceled, Sullivan would call up Wences, and Wences would run over and do his act. It was great. I love that guy.
So where are you? So what's what do you have anything that happening? As I say, you got your YouTube channel. Is there now that things are kind of like settling in and we're seeing a lot of we're kind of getting on the other end of this. Is there are you looking at trying to get your shows back on the road again, or?
I just turned 70. I've been doing this for 50 years. My interest in going on the road is diminished. I'm just dealing with the presenters and the travel and all the bullshit and the carbon footprint. And I just have lost a considerable amount of enthusiasm for that. Right. And making the movies it's extremely time consuming. It's very difficult. It's a new skill. I'm learning all kinds of stuff. I love the miniaturization of it. It's really fun dressing the sets. it's really fun looking at the frame edge to edge and composing it like you're a painter or something. I mean, it's all new territory for me. So that's really interesting. And I want to stick with the vent thing, keep working on the vent thing, and really find a way to make a revolutionary ventriloquist act.
Right. Yeah, there you go.
That means.
Well, perfect. Well, so Paul, we're knocking at the top of our hour, so I just want to, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a genuine pleasure chatting with you. It's so nice to talk to some pop culture icons that have Vermont roots. It's always so important. So,
Well, that's cool. Thanks so much. And yeah, I'm very grateful to my friends and family in Vermont, and the fans and supporters, and so many friends, so many wonderful people in the Northeast Kingdom and in Central Vermont. And I'm very grateful to the Putney School and the Goddard College and the Farmer Wilderness Camps more than anyone, because everything in my life flowed from Farmer Wilderness Camps.
Right.
Every job I ever had, everything came from my going to those Quaker summer camp down in southern Vermont. So it's a very special place to me, and I love it. So I'm very grateful.
You're right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, likewise, man.
But do you share that space too? Is that like your workstation as well?
No, I'm sitting at my desk,
Right.
and this is this really nice Danish modern bookshelf we have.
Oh wow!
And is the world seeing my office right now?
They are.
Yeah. This is really cool. I think he was a French artist.
Oh wow!
You see
Is
that?
it like a print? Is that a print of some kind?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's called Evacuation, and the death there is driving the train. And it's escaped my consciousness what that artist's name was, but I believe early 1920s.